Senku is clinically insane, and I can prove it. Not only can I prove that Senku has entered a deep psychosis, but I'll reveal a secret that will break the whole series. Now I know, that's a big claim, but calling Senku insane? I mean, that's crazy talk. Okay, maybe it's not so crazy, but it is crazy to say that this all begins before the first episode. But what's going on before the first episode that could make Senku insane? The petrification. But how could the petrification make Senku insane? Well, how does the petrification even work? Essentially, the petrification actively turns you into stone and, if reversed, can revert a person's cells, organs, and tissue back to their original state, acting like a giant pause button. Except this pause button can heal so much more, treating superficial wounds like cuts, scrapes, and stab wounds, and long-term diseases such as arthritis. Ooh, can it heal my anxiety? No. Oh, come on, please. Hell, at some point later in the manga, they even heal someone out of a comatose state. This is where people start to get uppity, believing that the petrification process is illogical. While it may not perfectly align with modern science, they are more similar than you might think. To be comatose is a loss of consciousness due to an acute illness or a disease. Well, what is petrification? As long as they're properly revived, it's normally just a loss of consciousness. Even if their head is cut off, as long as they're properly assembled, it's merely losing consciousness. The petrification reverts their brain back to its original state, and it can begin functioning again. But what if you never let the petrification take over your brain? Well, what if I told you that the mere fact Senku lost consciousness is proof his brain was never fully petrified, leading him down a road of psychosis? While neurologists are locked in a debate where consciousness truly resides, the most common theory is that consciousness is held within either all or selected parts of the cerebral cortex. Okay, perfect. It's just the cerebral cortex. And that would be where again? Well, that's right, the cerebral cortex and all of conscious thought just so happen to be in the exterior of the brain. So while Senku's body is petrified, his brain is completely exposed and functioning. How could it be working at all in a petrified body, let alone go insane? Much like gas for a car, our brain needs fuel to run, except instead of gasoline, our brain needs a cocktail of things like glucose, vitamins, minerals, and other essential nutrients and chemicals. Last time I checked, Senku can't really get access to food, water, and air at the moment. So how is Senku's brain sustaining itself? Unlike many others, I believe Senku's petrification is taking a unique approach. Take a look at this clip.
5, 6, 7, 8. Damn. Almost lost consciousness again. Seems to happen about every 800,000 seconds.
That's no mistake that Senku is occasionally losing consciousness. The petrification is healing less active parts of his brain as he is focusing on counting for days at a time. So when Senku is counting, he's using parts of his brain like the prefrontal cortex to help keep an active count by accessing his working memory. Therefore, parts of his brain like the amygdala, which process emotions and emotionally related memories, can be partially restored by the petrification, helping to improve his brain mass, blood count, and other factors that could potentially hinder him. This alone won't directly lead Senku into a psychosis, but it's what he does after that pushes him over the edge.
I'll need to think and count at the same time. Run parallel processes.
Now, parallel processing refers to the act of processing many stimuli at once. Normally, this refers to your senses. For instance, when I sit down to watch an episode of Jujutsu Kaisen, I don't process the color, shape, size, or distance of a character before I realize they die. It all happens at once. Now, it's unclear how Senku intends to use parallel processing, but he does understand that he needs to be using different parts of his brain to avoid losing complete consciousness. What he missed was that the petrification has been his only source of stability. But Senku was already well established as a genius before becoming petrified. So why did he just assume he could make such a drastic change? He didn't. Senku was already slipping into insanity before making the decision. If he was correct in counting his total seconds petrified, Senku has been alone for 116 billion seconds, equaling 3,692 years. Both social isolation and loneliness have already sunk in and crippled Senku's ability to make sound judgments long before this point. We can see the same effects in ourselves after quarantines or in prisoners in solitary confinement. That oh-so-common brain fog after we all re-entered society was just one of the more mild signs. When it comes to a more long-term stay, it can be much more serious. Take the case of Dennis Wade Hope, a Texas native who was sentenced to 27 years in solitary confinement. There, he experienced hallucinations, and after he was released, provided accounts of other inmates that were mutilating their bodies to ensure that they were still real. Keep in mind, this is starting to begin towards the extreme that we'll finally see once Senku begins parallel processing. In normal circumstances, social isolation primarily affects the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus. The atrophy of these can be detrimental. The atrophy of prefrontal cortex can result in poor attention, decision-making, planning, short memory, and attention. For the amygdala, poor emotional processing and decision-making, and for the hippocampus, a decline in long-term and declarative memory. The effectiveness of the petrification to heal these regions of brain is completely unknown, but it will be likely to see a significantly slower but stable decline over time, especially after nearly 4,000 years. However, after switching to parallel processing and reducing the helpful effects of petrification, Senku began to feel the effects more and more, and that is where I believe his psychosis began. But how can just that trigger psychosis? Well, the most common ways to trigger psychosis are through select medications, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and in select cases, severe depression. While Senku loses brain matter in an attempt to parallel process, a part of his brain has already began to severely atrophy, his amygdala, the brain's emotional command zone. Multiple studies have been conducted around smaller amygdala sizes being correlated to more severe depression symptoms. Therefore, I'm ready to conclude that Senku has already entered a deep depression at both the hopelessness of his situation and of the loss of his friends and family. But how does this psychosis manifest? Well, what if I told you none of the show ever happened? Senku's psychosis is so deep that he begins to experience hallucinations and delusions to such a level that compare to reality. Now, I know what you might be thinking. What? That's crazy. That could never happen, and it doesn't even make sense. If anything, I believe there's too much evidence for this argument. Due to the recent decision to begin parallel processing, most of his brain is active and having difficulty processing the lack of sensory input. For those who have not tried sensory deprivation tanks, many claim that after these hour-long sessions to have hallucinations or other out-of-body experiences. I believe that Senku's daily lack of sensory input and a severe psychosis inevitably lead him to develop hallucinations for every primal sense, including visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and gustatory. He then manifests a world of his own creation, where he can quite literally break out of his current reality and build the life he desires, such as seeing his friends, family, create science experiments, and overall lead humanity to a greater end. And this further feeds into a delusion that he can save the whole world with a string of half-baked technological advances imagined from the mind of a high school genius. We can see this through many of these technological advances being accurate to a degree, but not actually applicable. While Senku strives to save humanity within his own consciousness, he remains the last sad existence of humanity, left to die after a freak petrification accident. But hey, that's just a theory. An anime theory. And cut.